Hello and welcome back, future scientists. My name is Mr. K and I'm here with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I have another amazing lesson for y'all today talking about biology. So what exactly are we talking about? Well, we're talking about these little organs, and these little organs are called organelles, okay? Just the same way our body has a lot of different organs in them. You've got your brain that helps you think, you have your muscles and bones that work together to help you move around, you've got your skin, that's going to keep bacteria and germs outside of your body. Just like our body is filled with all these organs, your cells are filled with these little organs, and those little organs are called organelles, and they each have a specific job they have to play to keep the cell up and running and alive. Remember, the cell is the basic unit of structure and function for life, so it's got to do all 6 of those things that we discussed earlier, those 6 key characteristics of life. And cell organelles are the things that help get that done. So let's go ahead and hop into it today, okay? So one of the most important organelles that I want to talk about is the nucleus. Remember, you are a eukaryote, and what that means is that inside of each of your cells is a little organelle called a nucleus. You can kind of think of the nucleus like the brain of the cell. The same way that your brain kind of controls what your body does, the nucleus controls what the cell does. And it does that because inside of the nucleus is this very important macromolecule called DNA. That stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. That's basically the instructions that your cells follow so that they know what to do. Now, your nucleus is surrounded by a double membrane. What that means is that it's kind of different and set apart from the rest of the organelles inside of your body. It's not part of the cytoplasm like most of the other organelles that we're going to talk about. Okay? The nucleus is usually in the middle of the cell, and it's very easy to see. In order to see cells under a microscope, you have to stain them, and the nuclei are always the thing that stains the darkest. So if you're ever looking at a cell, there's usually going to be a dark circle in the middle. That's the nucleus. And again, the nucleus, that's where we house our DNA. DNA is very important for our cells because it basically tells the cell what to do. And there's usually only one nucleus per cell, but there are a couple of exceptions to that. For example, muscle cells usually have multiple nuclei and multiple mitochondria as well. Okay, so that's the nucleus. Let's see what else we got. Okay, so another super important organelle right next to the nucleus is called the endoplasmic reticulum. Now I know that's a really long name, okay, but sometimes we just abbreviate it as the ER, and I'm going to come back to that later on. Now the endoplasmic reticulum is going to be right next to the nucleus, okay? What is the function of the endoplasmic reticulum? Well, it kind of acts like the highway of the cell. When we need to move something around the cell, we use the endoplasmic reticulum. Just like if you needed to go to school, you would probably get in your car and then drive on a road. You can kind of think of the endoplasmic reticulum like the road or the highway of the cell, okay? One thing I like to tell students is remember that we sometimes abbreviate this organelle as just calling it the ER. Well, that's going to help you remember what the function of this organelle is, because its function is that it's the transporter, okay? It's the transporter. That's how we move things around the cell. Well, transporter ends in those 2 letters. It ends in ER. So that's kind of an easy way to remember it, okay? Now there's 2 different types of endoplasmic reticulum. You can have the rough ER or the smooth ER. In this picture, what we're looking at is known as the rough ER. Do you see those little bumps all over this endoplasmic reticulum? Well, those are actually ribosomes. And remember, ribosomes are a different organelle. They make proteins, but sometimes they're on the endoplasmic reticulum. And those little bumps give it a rough appearance. So if you ever see the rough endoplasmic reticulum, not only is it moving stuff around the cell, but it's probably also in charge of making some proteins. Now, if you see ER, endoplasmic reticulum, and it doesn't have those little ribosomes on it, it gets a different name, and we're going to call it the smooth ER. It doesn't have that rough appearance anymore. It looks smooth. Because it doesn't have ribosomes, though, it can't make proteins. So it makes a different macromolecule called lipids, which we'll talk more about at a later point, but you can kind of just think of them as fats, okay? So that's all about the endoplasmic reticulum. It's how we move stuff around the cell, okay? Here's another organelle I wanted to talk about. It's called the Golgi apparatus. This one has a funny name, and it kind of looks funny too. It kind of looks like a stack of plates. Now, the full name of this organelle is called the Golgi apparatus. And that second word is really important because you can see in the spelling of apparatus, it's got a couple P's in it. Well, that's actually going to help you remember what the job of this organelle is. Its job is that it stores, processes, and packages proteins. That's a lot of P words, right? That's an easy way to link what this cell does to its name. If you ever get a question about packaging or processing, proteins, anything like that, it's probably going to be the Golgi apparatus. So try to remember that. There's a lot of P words, and there's a couple of P's in the word Golgi apparatus, okay? So we also use the Golgi apparatus to transport molecules around, and we use these little things called vesicles. Now, one good thing to remember is that the word vesicles kind of sounds like vehicle. And how'd you probably get to school this morning? You probably rode in some kind of vehicle. These are just little vesicles, and that's how we're going to transport things around the cell outside of the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum doesn't go all the way to the edge of the cell, so if we've got to send it to the edge or to a different cell, that's when we'll use this little vesicle, okay? So that's all about the Golgi apparatus. Keywords here are processes and packages proteins, okay? Our next organelle is called the lysosome, and it's got a couple of different jobs. One thing I like to tell students is that lysosomes are like the garbage disposal of the cell. So if we need to clear out debris or if we've got some waste in the cell that we're trying to get rid of, the lysosome has this digestive enzymes that it's going to use to break that stuff down. Now I want you to think, if you spelled something on your desk and you had to clean it up, what would you use? Well, you might end up using a Lysol wipe, right? That's something that you would use to clean up. Well, just the way that a Lysol wipe is used to clean up a mess, lysosomes are used by the cell in order to clear that waste and debris. So that's a kind of easy way to remember what this organelle does. Lysosomes clean stuff up just like a Lysol wipe does, okay? Our next organelle is known as the mitochondria, and this is one of the most famous organelles of all because you can ask your parents, ask your grandparents, ask your uncles or aunts, and they could all tell you what is the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell, okay? It's making energy for the cell to use. It does this by a certain chemical reaction known as cellular respiration. What it does is it takes the food that you've eaten, once it's been broken down, and the air that you breathe, and it kind of combines them together through this chemical process, and it releases energy in the form of ATP, which we'll talk about later on. But that's why it's known as the powerhouse of the cell. This is where all the energy is coming from. So anytime you move around or think or even pick up your pencil to write in your notes, you're using energy that was made by the mitochondria inside of those cells, okay? The mitochondria also has a double membrane, and you can see in this picture it's kind of been cut in half a little bit so that you can see both of those membranes. So just like the nucleus, this is not really part of the cytoplasm. It's got its own membrane that it's enclosed inside of. Not only that, but mitochondria actually has its own DNA. This is a really interesting thing inside of your cells. Sometimes you probably know that if there was some kind of criminal investigation and we needed to figure out who the culprit was, we would test their DNA to see if we could find that person. Well, sometimes there's not enough DNA to use, so we'll use a different process called mitochondrial DNA. And mitochondrial DNA is actually passed from mother to offspring. So the DNA inside of your mitochondria is the same DNA inside of your mom's mitochondria, inside of your grandmother's mitochondria, going all the way back to what some people call mitochondrial Eve. Anyway, that's a story for another time. What we really want to know here is that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and this is where all the energy is coming from. What's our next organelle? Well, let's talk about chloroplast, okay? Chloroplasts are only inside of plant cells, so that's something that I need you to remember, okay? They're only inside of plant cells. And these use sunlight in order to make sugar through a process called photosynthesis, which we'll talk about later on. So plants don't really eat the way that animals do. They do this other process where they use the sun, they use the light from the sun, and they use water that they get from the ground, and they combine it together to make glucose. And that's really the only thing that a plant cell wants to eat is sugar. And glucose is a type of sugar, okay? It's also got that double membrane like the nucleus and the mitochondria, okay? These are only inside of plant cells. Another organelle that's only inside of plant cells is known as a cell wall, okay? Animal cells do not have a cell wall, so we don't have cell walls, but plant cells do. These are very rigid and they have a protective barrier, okay? They're located outside the cell membrane. So you've got the cell membrane, but even past that is the cell wall. It's made up of a certain type of sugar called cellulose, which is also known as fiber. So fiber is really important in our diets, and that's mostly coming from the plants, the fruits and vegetables that we eat, because those cells in fruits and vegetables is going to have cellulose in there. And that's good for our digestive system, is to have plenty of fiber. Okay? Animal cells don't have a cell wall, and we'll talk more about that here in the next unit, okay? Another really important organelle, and this is a slight difference in between animal and plants, is that this organelle is called a vacuole. And I kind of want you to think of this as like a warehouse. This is where we're going to store stuff. We might be storing food, we might be storing water. Inside of plant cells, the vacuole is very, very large. And inside of animal cells, instead of one big vacuole, animal cells have a lot of small vacuoles inside of it. The reason for this is, well, you know, our body has a skeleton, and the skeleton holds our body up. But plants don't have a skeleton, and so this vacuole helps keep the cell inflated. It makes this thing called turgor pressure. I don't know how much experience you have around plants or if you take care of them at your house or not, but sometimes you'll notice if you go a couple days without watering plants, they'll start to wilt. They'll just kind of be floppy and not standing up the way they're supposed to. Sometimes they look dead, but actually what happens is if you just pour a little bit of water in that plant, it's going to soak it up. These vacuoles are going to fill back up, and the plant's going to stand up all the way. So don't think that a plant's dead right away. Just give it a little bit of water, and in a couple of hours it'll be standing up. So that's why the plant cells have a large vacuole. We want to fill it up as much as we can to make that plant stand up, because it doesn't have a skeleton like you and I do, okay? Okay, here's another organelle. It's called a centriole. Centrioles are very important for cell division. They kind of line all the DNA and all the organelles up in a straight line. You know when sometimes you were younger and your teacher you would be going from one side of the school to the other, and your teacher would make you stand in a straight line so she could keep track of all of the students? The centrioles kind of do that inside of the cell. Cell division can be messy sometimes, and we want to make sure all the DNA and all the organelles go where they're supposed to, so the centriole kind of lines everything up in the middle and kind of organizes that process, okay? Now, these are usually only found in animal cells, but plant cells can have them, okay? And they're made up of a special protein called microtubules. Okay? Y'all, thanks so much for paying attention and following along with me. I got a couple of review questions I wanted to do before we wrap up, okay? So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to ask the question, and I'd like you to just yell it out inside of your classroom. Make sure you're the first one to say it, and say it nice and loud. Be confident in your answer, because that way all your classmates are going to know that you have been paying attention. So let's see what these questions are, and again, y'all try to yell them out before I put the answer up here, okay? So here's my first review question. Which organelle is the control center of the cell? Anyone remember what that was? This one kind of acts like the brain of the cell. That's right, it's the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center. It controls all of the cell's activities. Okay, here's my next question. Which organelle holds the cell together? That one's kind of tricky. This one holds the cell together. Well, this is going to be the cell membrane, okay? We actually didn't talk about this one today, but we talked about it last class, okay? Remember, the cell membrane is like the boundary of the cell. It's where a cell ends, okay? Third question, which organelles, multiple, are not found in animal cells? Take a second and try to yell all of them out. Okay, well, for this one, you could have the cell wall, the central vacuole, and the chloroplast. Remember, cell walls and chloroplasts are only inside of plant cells, and for the central vacuole, animal cells have little vacuoles and not one big one like plant cells do. Okay, here's my next question. Which organelle helps plant cells make food? I'll give you a hint. It's one of those three we just talked about. That's right. I know someone came up with the right answer here. Which organelle helps plant cells make food? That's called the chloroplast. Okay, and then my last one before we wrap up for the day. What does ER stand for? That's that long name. I'm sure someone came up with the endoplasmic reticulum though. Y'all, thanks so much for following along. I'm so excited to teach all about biology and all of these cells and organelles. Your teacher has some other assignments for you to practice this stuff on, so make sure to give it your best effort, and I hope you have a wonderful day.